Gratitude and happiness and peace is all goes hand in hand. I got to say something about the Guatemalan people is they are so thankful and they will thank you over and over and over again. You know, I've been to some countries that are more entitled and you give them and it's like they don't even bother to thank you because you owe it to them. But those people are not very happy. Gratitude, there's a verse in everything, give thanks, for this is the will of God in Christ Jesus concerning you. So we need to give thanks in everything.
Welcome back to the Sparks of Gratitude podcast, everybody. We are so grateful for you. And today we have an amazing guest who I met a couple of months ago when he was visiting here in Utah at the premiere of a film that is a documentary about the work that he's doing. He is the founder, CEO, director, mastermind, missionary for Beeline Wheelchairs in Guatemala, Mr. Mark Richard. Welcome to the conversation.
Well, thanks for having me. This is really an honor.
Yeah, well,
So let's,
I'm thrilled to have you here. So we have a mutual acquaintance now. Our friend Scott Porter from who does an event every year for charity called Churros for Change, because his main business is he's in the churro business, but he also wants to make an impact on the world. And every year, the Tuesday after Thanksgiving, he does a big event to raise money for a cause. And at that event, he was premiering the documentary about your business, about Beeline Wheelchairs. And what's the name of that documentary?
Untethered.
Untethered, right? I mean, it sounds like I love the title of the documentary because I remember hearing somebody, and I'll let you kind of explain how you got into this, but you're getting wheelchairs to people with mobility issues, you know, that need wheelchairs and can't move and can't walk, and you're based in Guatemala. But I remember hearing a story once of, it may be anecdotal, but I'd love to hear where this goes with us, that someone was apologizing to somebody for being confined to a wheelchair. And they said, "What are you talking about? I'm liberated because of this wheelchair." And so from that, I've just seen in your documentary and what you do that you have provided thousands of people in your lifetime the ability to move and have access and employment because you get them moving. So could you tell us a little bit about Beeline, and then we'll find out how in the world you ended up there. Hey there, everyone. Did you know that beyond hosting the Sparks of Gratitude podcast, I am also an estate planning attorney, and I love gratitude, and my law firm is proud to sponsor this video. Since 2010, in my law practice, I have designed and delivered customized peace of mind with sophisticated estate planning made easy. So whether you need foundational estate planning, including revocable trusts, wills, powers of attorney, and healthcare directives, which is what most people need, or you might need advanced strategies such as irrevocable trust for asset protection or advanced estate tax planning, I am here to guide you every step of the way. Because at the end of the day, your peace of mind is my peace of mind. You can visit randallsparks.com and I can get started helping you plan for the future today. Now back to our podcast.
Let me go back to 1988. I was living here in Guatemala, no more than a mile as the crow flies from where I'm sitting right now in our Beeline factory. It was a sustainable agriculture. It was a boys' ranch, but it was self-funded or self-sustaining, and it was funded through the sale of the eggs that 5,000 laying hens laid. And during that time in Guatemala, it was the time of the unrest, the armed conflict, and we were providing a safe haven and getting teenage boys out of the some of the most dangerous areas, and the kids mainly came from north of here in the Department of El Quiche. But during that first year, and excuse me if I cough, this is the draw. We're in the middle of the dry season and the dust is terrible. So anyway, what, in the middle of building the ranch, we had to fly up to the States and drive the agricultural supplies down. It was the cages, the watering system, and the feeding system for the chickens. And while just before we drove up, I saw a woman crawling across the highway about less than 10 miles from here. And I thought, I want to get her a wheelchair. But what I didn't do, I didn't stop and tell her because I'd seen her there twice and I knew she couldn't live too far away. But often what well-meaning Westerners do is we promise and we don't deliver.
Mm.
So I called my friend Carl, who had been in a wheelchair since he contracted polio at 8 years old back in the 50s. And he asked around. I said, "You know anybody that has a used wheelchair?" Because he runs in those circles. And anyway, long story short, he found 20 wheelchairs, and we put them on top of the fifth wheel trailer and drove them down to Guatemala. And that was 1988. Started giving away those chairs, and the people started coming out of the woodwork. And we gave Makadia her chair, and then we gave away the other chairs. And I just assumed that was kind of a one-time miraculous divine thing that happened. And over the next probably year and a half, people kept coming and they would find their way to the farm, and you had to walk a mile down a dirt lane to get to it and ask for a wheelchair and would say, "Sorry, there's no more." And after a while, I got convicted, and I thought, you know what? Our 2-year commitment to the project was coming up soon, and I decided that I was going to collect more wheelchairs. I didn't know how. I didn't have any money. I spent all any severance pay that I got because I wasn't under any kind of a mission board or anything. It was privately funded, and all I knew is I was supposed to collect more wheelchairs, and a lot of miraculous things happened. But anyway, moved back to the States. I ended up in Ohio, and the largest wheelchair factory in the United States was on my route. I was shipping manager for a wholesale greenhouse, and right on the route where I was sending the trucks was the largest wheelchair factory in the US called Invacare. And I somehow got in contact with the engineer who worked there and was involved in, disposing of the chairs. And so once a month, we would go and get anywhere from 20 to 50 wheelchairs. They would even give us the wheelchair boxes that we can, as we refurbished them. And I had kids from the youth group in the church, Boy Scouts, volunteers would come to a donated, it was an old greenhouse that we converted into a repair shop. And anyway, just started fixing them and driving them to Guatemala. I would go bring anywhere from 20 to 45 wheelchairs on a trip. Excuse me, bought an old school bus, had a rack welded, and it just snowballed from there. And next thing you know, I'm working with some of you may have heard of Johnny Erickson Tata. She broke her neck in a diving accident back in 67, and she's written many books and has devotional radio programs on many radio stations, but developed her Wheels for the World program. They connected me with Hope Haven. But so for the next years, we just collected used wheelchairs. But the problem we had was, for example, if I would send 200, I could get at least 200 refurbished wheelchairs, everything from sport chairs, hand crank chairs, one-arm drive chairs, tilt and space, stroller-based chairs, hospital chairs, reclining chairs. We would try to send a good breakdown to the countries we ship to, and but we never had enough children's chairs. We never. I developed a relationship with a friend of mine who they were building a hand crank chair that was designed for Africa, and we would include their wheelchairs. But we were always, every time we got a chair, we would try to figure out a way to turn a 16-inch chair into a 14-inch chair or a 18-inch chair into a 16-inch chair. And I decided that, I needed to design a chair, and I wanted to not only make a chair, but make something that's modular and that people in wheelchairs could assemble them. And the first chairs were assembled by retired gentlemen and inmates in the South Dakota State Prison, and actually in two different prisons and a trustee unit. But then we could supplement. I could send, you know, when I sent 200 chairs, I could send, 25 or even 50 of these chairs to supplement all the other chairs. And then when people came, we would, and when we would bring volunteer therapists, certified rehab specialists would come with us, and everybody would feel very satisfied that they got everybody in the right size chair. But through the years, other organizations stepped up and started building and buy or refurbishing chairs, the Wheels for the World program, Wheels for Humanity. A lot of groups would collect chairs, and then groups would buy new chairs, but they were basically meeting that adult need, the needs for the elderly, but you wouldn't dare. I mean, it would be considered malpractice if I was to put a child with high tone and cerebral palsy and a scoliosis and tight hamstrings and all these conditions into a hospital chair in the U.S. If you did that, you'd be sued for malpractice. So I had spent enough time with wheelchair experts and I'd collected enough wheelchairs that I kind of knew what we needed, and I knew that we needed to limit the number of bearing sizes and wheels and casters and build a modular chair. And that's where Beeline came from. When I first came up with some of the first prototypes, I met somebody somebody in their church was the patent lawyer that taught patent law at UCLA. And so and he said, yeah, let's talk to the students. The next thing you know, they did pro bono. All I had to do was pay the filing fee.
Mhm.
But if anybody knows anything about patents, it's not cheap to hire patent lawyers to write up a patent for you. So, and that just fell in my lap. But I was working for another organization doing everything from collecting and refurbishing chairs, and then building an earlier model. We call it the Hope Haven Kid Chair. It was a chair that it was 3/4 inch aluminum coupled together we started with like recycled plastic, and then we later went after a lot of testing and having some failures because the recycled plastic, a lot of times it has air bubbles, so it has weaknesses in it. And we started to use HDPE plastic and never had any failures after that. But we were, what we had was a 12-inch wide chair and a 14-inch wide chair, but it didn't tilt in space. It didn't have the adjustability. We couldn't adjust the floor to seat height. We could do this seat to back depth, but not the seat to back angle. Is easy. It was very complicated. So I came up with the Beeline concept and with the simple bracket, similar to what you would adjust the height on your bicycle post
Mhm.
or release the wheels off a high-end bicycle. The same system, only about, I don't know, many, many, many times stronger because quite a bit bigger. And we made a system where we could tilt the chair, tilt it in space so that the children could, you know, lay back, breathe better, swallow better, and then it would reduce the pressure so they wouldn't get pressure sores.
Yeah, and if anybody wants to see these, I mean, you can go to beelinewheelchairs.org or on Instagram, and there's a lot of photos. And this is inspiring to look at these. And I mean, not only that, it was great to see in the movie Untethered the stories of not only how did this all develop, but examples of people applying for these and then having them custom assembled specifically for them and the change that that made for them. So I invite everybody to check that. Go to Instagram.com and look up Beeline.wheelchairs and you'll see what he's talking about.
Yeah. BeelineWheelchairs.org. Well, Beeline Wheelchairs, yeah, on Instagram.
Yeah.
And our website is BeelineWheelchairs.org.
Yeah. So how since 1988, where this just happened because you wanted to get one person a wheelchair, you ended up bringing 20 plus of them down that first round. And now, how many over the years, how many wheelchairs do you think you've delivered?
You know, because I've helped co-found some other organization, if I could take credit for some of these groups that have given away hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands, and I probably could have my fingers on millions of wheelchairs, but I personally put tens and tens and tens of thousands of people in wheelchairs or handled those chairs. We've done a lot of wheelchairs in Guatemala, but I think I've still given away more wheelchairs in Vietnam,
Mhm.
because of my earlier years back in the mid 90s through the 2000s and all over Africa and Latin America. But I don't know how to answer that question,
Yeah.
but
Well, the
I
answer
know
is
just through Hope Haven, we were doing 5 to 8,000 chairs a year. So
so hearing, I mean, it's impressive for me to hear the like large numbers and large, it's all comparative, compared to what, but to me that sounds just massive. But I think on the individual level, seeing the difference it makes to the one person who gets the wheelchair, could you share, one or maybe a couple experiences of what that's like and the impactful moment of somebody getting their chair?
I'm going to talk about a little boy. We've done so many chairs, 20, 25 chairs a week, and a lot of really powerful stories. But there was this little boy, I'm trying to think of his name, but his mother would have to carry him on his back. And we put him in a chair that he could self-propel. He had spina bifida, so he had good, upper body strength, but he just couldn't walk. So we put him in the chair, and he had never been in a wheelchair, and he's pushing himself. We can flip our armrest up and put camber in the wheels to make it easier. We can adjust the center of gravity on the chair to make it really easy for these children, even a 4-year old, to push themselves around. He's pushing himself all over the parking lot. Then when we're taking the pictures and giving some gifts and Bible storybook and a Bible, and we're there with the mom and want to pray with them, but we're at that moment. He's so excited, and he basically told his mother, and I can't, it was, the word, I wish my wife was here, it's an expression that they say, "But you don't have to carry me anymore." And he said, "Mom, you don't have to carry me." So, mom's crying, he's all excited, but that's a real recent story. Last week, we had a little girl come for a stander, and we had given her the wheelchair some months before, and it's hard to recognize some of these kids. When you see thousands of kids, but the mother was carrying her to me, and she just wanted to hug me, but she could hardly use her arms, so she's hugging me, and then the mother says, "You remember her?" And then she's lifting her foot up, and all of a sudden I remember she was writing with her feet on the tray, was doing some coloring, and the way she would shake hands is she would lift up her foot, and then you would lift up your foot, and you would touch feet, and then,
Wow.
go up and down. But anyway, it, those are just a few recent stories, but I'm gonna tell you one more story that's about 3 months ago. Is this boy had, severe cerebral palsy, and he never got out of the house. He would, look very distorted, very, serious contractures and high tone. really bad scoliosis. And when everybody else left the waiting room, he stayed in there. He did not want to go out because he was so, people treated him like he was a leopard. So I went and just went out of my way to make friends with him. And he finally got comfortable enough to go from the waiting room. I think he had already managed to get to the evaluation room, and then we took him in where they were gonna set up the chair. And based on his measurements, they'd already had the chair the right size and everything for him. So my team got him fitted. You would never guess it was him because he was laying on his side, his legs were out this way and his arms were out that way. We got him in the wheelchair, and then he had come down with a community-based rehab program that had brought about, I think, 12 to 15 children on a bus. So we had all the kids lined up and, lined up in their wheelchairs with their parents behind them. And, I'm terrible with names, but it's on the Facebook page. But we had everybody there, and when we're, you know, kind of doing a final send off to everybody, I asked everybody, who's more handsome, him or me? And everybody, with one accord, mentioned his name, and he got this big smile on his face because he's never been told how handsome he is. And during the distribution, we were kind of teasing him, but just to see the breakthrough, to see a boy in a matter of, this was probably an hour and a half time, to go from being hidden, not wanting to be in public. Of course, all these people were from his village, so, they knew who he was. Now, he wasn't, he couldn't self-propel, but he probably weighed 100 pounds, and imagine a mother having to carry him and hold him in his lap all the time. These mothers, are just absolutely amazing. But, it's a God-given love that they have for their children, no matter what their condition is.
Oh,
I could go all night. I could
yeah, well,
you gotta
and I
stop
could
me or
stick
I'll
with the
keep telling you.
stories, of you telling those stories all night. I mean, one, because I think that that's what's transformational is the story, and it also reveals the need that actually is. So one thing that it, brings up for me is when you say how many chairs that you've had your finger on to get out to people, like, somebody is in each one of those chairs. That's a lot of people who need a chair, and as much as you've been able to provide that, how big is the need still?
Well, cerebral palsy, we have a banner on our wall from the Association of Cerebral Palsy, and they say that there's 17 million people worldwide affected. Now, most of these are from birth, not all cerebral palsy. A kid can, from near drowning or from abuse or head injury or an accident, can have cerebral palsy. But 17 million worldwide, and probably half of the wheelchairs that we make, because of their postural support, go to kids with cerebral palsy. I mean, a lot of people are, not everybody has cerebral palsy is gonna need a wheelchair, but most of them do. So, there are no statistics, but I'm sure there's easily 10 million children in the world. There's I can easily say that, and there's no way that anybody can say that it can't be possible.
Well, and it
I'm
just
talking to
seems that
children that need wheelchairs. The World Health Organization claim there's 80 million people that don't have wheelchairs. That's including adults, but I believe that's low.
well, and you're based in Guatemala, and primarily that's where your chairs are going, or where do you distribute your chairs?
Our biggest shipment abroad was to Kenya, and we've done some air cargo. I don't know. We've sent over 600, close to 700 wheelchairs to Africa, mainly Kenya, and some have gone to Mozambique. But we do the surrounding countries. We ship to the Dominican Republic, for El Salvador, Belize, and a lot to Mexico. But our goal isn't so much to ship from here, but to duplicate what we're doing. And that's our goal, is to set up a training center here. And we've got people from South America, the Caribbean, India, Africa that want to duplicate what we're doing.
And it seems like that's moving, and well, now you've made a system that can be duplicated.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
And we're dialing in all the drawings, and yeah, we're very close to being able to just pick up and duplicate this. But in Guatemala, there's 18 million people, but when you countries, if we went and with surrounding countries, if we, for example, set up in Kenya and just did the bordering countries, Ethiopia and Uganda, there would be 10 times more the need.
Mm.
So we're hoping to do something big, but of course we can't do that without sponsors and donors, and
Well, and
because
speaking of that,
we give them all away.
yeah, the reminder again is go check out beelinewheelchairs.org, and people can contribute and donate through the website, right?
Correct. Yeah. On every page of our of BelineWheelchairs.org, there's a place to donate. So it's
So,
pretty simple.
yeah, all the help matters, and I mean, it makes a huge difference. What's the cost for a single chair on average to produce a single chair?
Well, for us to have a wheelchair at our dock ready to give away here at our clinic, with paying, at this point, as we increase, it's economy of scale. So whether we build 50 chairs a month or 500 chairs a month, our rent is, over $5,000. So the more we build, but right now we say $400. But a chair in the US that provides tilt and space and all the different, elevating leg rest, headrest trays, and all those features, you would easily spend 10 times
Okay.
that.
Well, that's to keep in mind, and for people that contribute to know, what approximately how many people they can get sitting in a chair for their donation. Um, and sometimes that helps me when I'm thinking about that is putting faces and butts and seats in my mind when I'm making a
Yeah.
contribution. Um, okay.
And one thing they can, if they wanna go to the movie, you have to put untetheredmovie.com, and that will take you, because there's other untetheds out there.
Yeah. And
Untetheredmovie.com, and you can see the trailer or rent the movie for 48 hours. But it's only $6 to,
yeah.
and hopefully before too long it'll be on YouTube or a platform like that.
Yeah, I hope so, but it's inspiring story, and which makes me think of, you yourself, there's a story far beyond you deciding to give wheelchairs to people, and, I mean, 1, you wrote a book called All We Need Is a Pair of Pliers, but your story, there's a lot of fun stories in there, but I'm really curious about maybe leading up to what eventually became like a dramatic spiritual turning point in your life. Could you give us a little background, and you get to choose where to start and what's this impactful turning point in your life that changed your trajectory?
Well, if you look at the cover of my book, it's me and my five brothers sitting in the back with the tailgate open of a '61 Volkswagen van, and we're all in our suits and ties. But we were raised in Southern California, and I was probably 9 or 10 years old in that picture. But what happened is, within 3 or 4 years, my parents got divorced, and that was a real hard point in our lives, especially back then. I won't get into the details, but it was we had moved to Wisconsin, and but when I was 16, 17 years old, the Vietnam War was going on, and concerned about getting drafted. And so there was that whole hippie movement, and I went headlong. I mean, I ran away from home at 15 years old. Went to Chicago like the month after the Democratic convention, when they had locked uh, all the demonstrations at that time. So I ended up in detention, locked up I mean, back then, I'm 15 years old. I'm a runaway, and they have to transfer me to the juvenile center. They sent a paddy wagon and they handcuffed me. Yeah, anyway,
I bet you weren't laughing about it then.
no, but I was, went to the south side of Chicago. And yeah, I was glad that my mother came down and picked me up and got
Yeah.
me, the 165 miles back to Madison, Wisconsin. But the next year, I ran away to the Haight-Ashbury and the
Mm.
Sunset Strip and you know, the whole hippie. So I was doing intravenous drugs at 15 years old. I was doing psychedelic drugs and marijuana. And for a couple of years, I was very deep into that. And then, probably one of the best tragedies that happened to me is I got hepatitis from intravenous drug use, but I was using barbiturates. I was basically self-medicating because I was basically doing the same drugs that if they committed you for, you know, overdosing on LSD, the drugs that I was giving myself is what they would have given me if they put me in the state facility. But I ended up with hepatitis, 3 weeks in the University of Wisconsin hospital, and the nurses I was 17, the there was a 17-year-old girl that was in the room before me that died from hepatitis. So all the hospital staff was lecturing me, but loving on me and just telling me, "You have no idea how serious this is." And, no, the fresh memory of this young girl lost her life
Mm.
from hepatitis. But that gave me an opportunity to start praying and, did a lot of praying. And then, later I was out in California and somebody gave me a New Testament. This was 1970 and, the whole Jesus revolution. So I went headlong into out of that whole drug culture. But I needed a discipleship program. I didn't need to become a member of a church and just go to Sunday and Sunday evening and maybe a midweek service or something. I needed to be kind of like, Alcoholics Anonymous need that support network.
Yeah.
And I needed that, and I got involved, and I ended up in a very legalistic group that was probably much more that I asked that I needed, but I think is what God knew that I needed, and I spent, my late teens and early 20s traveling in this group and, studying we were just studying the Bible and church history and, it was, I didn't go to a Bible college, but in a way, I did. I didn't go to a university, but you don't know how much time I spent at university libraries studying, church history and Old Testament. So I was kind of self-taught, but I guess, being attention deficit disorder, I couldn't sit still in a classroom anyway. I was, so I think, God used my disabilities to help me learn in other ways. So,
Well, and something that I've seen as a through line through all the conversation I have in this podcast is that somehow when it comes to gratitude, people somehow find this idea that life is not happening to me, but it's happening for me. And when you described something that like the fortune of that tragedy of having a possible near death experience with contracting hepatitis is what changed your life completely. But
mhm,
then I think something is so special about being able to see and find meaning in those moments and take it and run with it and the gift that comes through the pain.
right. What's the verse, about, it's good that I've been afflicted or else I would have gone astray. So
Mm.
like affliction, you know, it's God's way of chastising us and putting us back on track or keeping us from straying. So, yeah, afflictions. And I see that in these families that have children with disabilities is, when you ask them to pray, if we can pray with them, and then all of a sudden you see them crying and praying, you know that they have a relationship with the Lord, that they know how to talk to him and through, especially like in Guatemala, they there are no safety nets. The government isn't giving them wheelchairs. I mean, I saw once the government was buying some sports chairs for the basketball teams, and that was just a one-time deal, but, yeah, they can't depend on the government, and so they have to trust in the Lord.
Well, and it seems like that changed your life, and then you've kind of been leaning in whatever your endeavors have been, but the faith has driven that all along.
Yes, faith and simple obedience. I would am a very unlikely hero. In fact, me and my brother were featured in Heroes for Today back in '97.
Tell me about that.
What's that?
Oh, tell us
We're
about that.
coming back from a wheelchair delivery in Vietnam, and we're sitting next to a guy that writes for the Los Angeles Times. And if you know anything about Reader's Digest, they don't just write stories; they do stories that have already been written. So the L.A. Times did a huge story back in it would have been the winter of 97, 96 to 97. Anyway, he wrote the story and then got a call from Reader's Digest, and they decided that, it was really this story was more about my brother who had started Wheels for Humanity and later Global Mobility, so it was mainly a Los Angeles story because he was doing the same thing that I was doing in Iowa and South Dakota and Los Angeles. And, but his story, he said, "Well, I gave away my first wheelchairs, but my brother Mark had then just talked about my whole story and finding and giving away that first wheelchair in Guatemala." So I guess we shared that Heroes for Today. May of '97, Heroes for Today, Reader's Digest. So, but, yeah, I was the most unlikely hero. But I hope that people that think that God can't use them, I've done this or I'm not qualified or it's about obedience. It's not, there's a saying that he doesn't call the qualified, but he qualifies the called. So you don't, if you're not qualified, I wasn't qualified, but guess what? Over the years, I visited wheelchair factories on practically every continent, and from little shops to big, major factories that produce the chairs for the Western world. And I got to refurbish chairs that were made from the US and Canada. Everything that's been made over the last 50 or 100 years, I got those chairs donated and I had to figure out how to fix them and which shop to send them to because I had up to 10 different shops in a tri-state area before I started building wheelchairs. We'd single sort them and send them and train people how to fix them. So I had to learn, and I saw the mistakes that some of the companies did. Of course, they didn't know that they were going to have to recall or change things, but I got to see it through seeing the different models that they'd had over the years. And so I don't know if there's very few. I don't know if there's anybody that's handled more and refurbished more chairs and seen more factories. The overall scope. I don't. Am I bragging? But I can say that. I don't know anybody, and I know everybody or almost everybody in this field. So
Yeah, well, he qualifies the called, so I like the idea of obedience. If you feel like God is speaking to you, if you do what he says, now your life changes and the world can change.
but see, God uses us. He we're his hands and feet, but he can't use us if we're too stubborn or we're too busy, too occupied with other things. So yeah, he'll use you. And there's a saying here in Spanish,
Yeah, say it in
if you
Spanish.
do something and they can't if they can't repay you, it's, God's gonna repay you. And
Mhm.
it's, and if you have faith and you know that Jesus is, God's preparing a place for us, then you know that you don't have to lay up treasures on this earth that, so
Well, it seems like trust in that. I had a guest on the podcast last year whose name was Megan Fate Marshman, and she's a Christian pastor, and she wrote a book called Relaxed.
Mhm.
And the reason it was the title is someone was asked, if you could describe Jesus in one word, what would that be? And someone said, well, relaxed, because he's not worried about a thing. And I feel like on the flip side, if we can trust in him, well, then we'll just follow what he said.
Mm.
um,
Yeah, unfortunately, a lot of people use religion to control people, and they use guilt, and they use fear, and they paint God as this, judgmental, you know, person up in the sky that's, looking for every mistake, to, condemn us. Just about 3 weeks ago, I had a guy come down, he's a pastor, but when he was 28 years old, he left the old order Amish, and he had to explain why he left the Amish. Is his mother basically told him, every time he does something wrong, God's gonna judge him. And there was like no mercy or no forgiveness, and it was very, very legalistic and strict. And then he later, developed a relationship with God and realized that God was forgiving. But he had to leave the Amish. He loves the Amish, and but he doesn't, he knows that that's wrong. That's keeping people from having a relationship and knowing a loving God that, forgives and wants to use us and lead us and forgive us. And
well, Mark, I'm so inspired by what you're doing and your commitment to follow what you feel called to do. What maybe we'll kind of finish with this is, what have you learned about gratitude in your life? What it means to you or how you've seen that in others?
gratitude and happiness and peace is all goes hand in hand. And I got to say something about the Guatemalan people is they are so thankful, and they will thank you over and over and over again. And I've been to some countries that are more entitled, and you give them, and it's like they don't even bother to thank you because you owe it to them. And but those people are not very happy. But yeah, gratitude. Yeah, and what does it say? And there's a verse in everything give thanks, for this is the will of God in Christ Jesus concerning you. So we need to give thanks in everything. Even give you an example. Yesterday, I was flying back from the States. I was visiting a few churches and my flight was delayed coming back, and I'm thinking, "Oh, great. If I come in, fly to Guatemala in midday, I don't have to battle the traffic to get back to the factory because it's a difference between probably rush hour adds an hour and a half, 2 hours to a 25-mile drive." And they kept delaying, and there was some maintenance problem on the plane. And, within about an hour of waiting, within an hour of, waiting, I, sat in a different place and sat next to a Korean pastor, and, we had so much in common, and it was like I spent the next all of a sudden, it didn't matter that the flight was late because we're talking and just connecting on so many different levels. In fact, he's gonna come here tomorrow, with his wife and another couple they're with and visit the factory. So, I wasn't very thankful that first hour that the flight was late. Then when I realized that, God wanted me to sit next to John Kim, Pastor John, and all of a sudden, it didn't matter. I mean, I got home late and that I had to fight the traffic and crawl and, bumper to bumper traffic for a couple hours. But anyway, sometimes we don't want to be thankful, but be thankful for everything because sometimes things don't go your way and there's a reason. So be thankful and have gratitude.
Well, Mark, I'm thankful for you, thankful for sharing some of your story with us. And again, I invite people to check out on Instagram and on your website, Beeline Wheelchairs, and contribute. Help. You're changing somebody's life, and not just the individual, but their whole family.
Mhm.
And it really makes a difference. And it's exciting to see. You can go to Untethered, untetheredmovie.com
Movie.com.
and check it out.
Yeah.
It's worth it. It's fascinating. So, Mark, thank you so much. I'm so grateful to
Okay. I
share this
really
time with you.
appreciate it. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Thanks. Bye.